A common axiom is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another axiom is that we sweat in peace so that we don't bleed in war. Here at the Marine Corps Association, we fully understand both. That is why we offer through our professional development page on our website a comprehensive catalog of battle studies, tactical and ethical decision games, and war games to ensure that not only do we learn from the past, but we embrace the thoughts and decisions that influence the outcomes of some of the greatest actions of the Marine Corps. We have tools and techniques that will enhance both unit training as well as enable comprehensive self study. Check out all that the Marine Corps Association has to offer on our website. Go to mca-marines.org/professional development. That's mca-marines.org/professional development and get your reps and sets in. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, this is episode 193. This week, we welcome August Cole to the show. August is the co-author of the books Ghost Fleet and Burn-In, managing partner of Useful Fiction, and a non-resident senior fellow in the Forward Defense Practice of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. We were lucky enough to catch August at Modern Day Marine, and he was kind enough to give us some time instead of calling security. I sit down with August, while also suppressing my urge to just nerd out for the entire interview, to talk to him about the genesis behind his Useful Fiction project, the challenge of operating in a world where the lines between the hypothetical and reality are blurred, and how narrative can be a balm for the competition for attention in this current tech proliferation ecosystem. Whew, that's a mouthful. I will tell you, though, August thrives in cautionary tale spaces, but I caution you not to miss this one. Here is episode 193. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you for joining us and your continued support. Probably much to your chagrin at this point, I'm still Vic, and I am really excited to be welcoming the guest today here on the MDM showroom floor, August Cole. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm really enjoying the show.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to avoid geeking out. So for our listeners who haven't been paying attention, August Cole, you are the author of Ghost Fleet, of Burn-In. You have Useful Fiction. You work very closely with the DoD leadership, Atlantic Council as well. I mean, you are one of the foremost thinkers of sort of employment of near and future technologies. And your books are amazing. We met back in 2016 when we Futures Division hosted a sci-fi workshop.
That's right,
yeah,
Monaco.
And so, anyways, it's so good to have you again, and thank you so much for spending time here today.
Of course, look, it's great to see you again, and it is, I think, a sign that this path that I've been on, that really we're all on, as we're trying to figure out what's not just anymore over the horizon, but technologically changing operating environment. What does warfare and conflict actually look like in the future?
Yeah.
That's something that increasingly more and more people are looking to these new ways to do it. And our approach, which has roots in Ghost Fleet from 2015, Burn-In, our book from 2020, is rooted in, fact-based, but really, applied fiction. It's a bit on the nose, but that's why we call it useful fiction.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about useful fiction. Shameless plug, we have Useful Fiction links on our website, so please, for our MCA listeners, go to mca.org and check out. We have links. If you could talk a little bit, what is Useful Fiction, and what was the genesis behind that, other than, like you said, good writing?
Useful Fiction is a project that became a futures-oriented business that Peter and I have started, where we do three things. Number one is we write commissioned fiction. More recently for MARSOC, we've been working with them over the last few years, doing a mix of short narratives, helping really understand the future operating environment.
Yeah.
And there's an approach you can take, I think, in basing these kinds of projects on real world trends and technologies. Even though they're fictional, having them really rendered quite realistically, because things like Murphy's Law will exist in the future, right? Technology is not a panacea. We have to really think through how it's implemented. And so being able to look at operating concepts and make them less abstract, especially when you're dealing with a whole host and raft of new innovations that adversaries are bringing. So fiction is one part of that. And the projects range, again, from some of the work we've done with MARSOC to novel-length projects. We just completed one for the U.S. Army called Task Force Talon. And the other thing we do is training. So we can get people together for a day, 2 days, and we impart basically some of the lessons learned that we have picked up over the last 5 years in using narrative to explore the future through storytelling.
Yeah.
And we bring in SMEs, and they might be a 4-star who, like Admiral John Richardson or Commandant Berger, who would be able to talk about, how do they like to be briefed? Because again, this is applied storytelling. How to talk to the boss is crucial, just as it is how to speak, say, within a formation or a unit. We also will hear from, top Hollywood storytellers who are really among the best at not just thinking up, what is going to make a great film, but also doing it collaboratively. And that's, I think, a really important distinction to make as we look at what's going on in the creative communities and how do you bring that back into the national security realm. A writer's room that is working on a show like Three Body Problem, for example, is dealing with an incredibly complex set of intellectual, of story issues. You've got different talents. You have to figure out how to bring them to the fore, all towards a goal. And then when you actually then have to make that project, hearing a Hollywood director or producer talk about some of the logistics, the synchronizing of effects, right? It's not dissimilar from how people who are here at the show today are describing, the coordination of an operation, right? It's 100. Very similar. And so that's been one of the really interesting things to hear is when we run these workshops, you hear from people almost, the light bulb going off, so to speak, as they understand that they may have picked up a new way to think about that coordination. We've done those workshops for everybody from Special Operations Command to Air Force Blue Horizons, and it's we're really lucky to take that. And the last thing we do is almost more consultative on futures, kind of advising, and we get to work with a lot of command level, teams, commanders action groups, that sort of thing, to bring those together. And so that's been really the culmination of the methodologies, again, from Ghost Fleet and Burn-In, is bringing them into the DoD, also working with allies. The MOD in the UK has been a group we've worked with for quite a bit, from war colleges to their version of DARPA, worked with the French, the Norwegians, and others. Dan,
I love that this is something that has grown into, and it's being so widely accepted. I was growing up in the Marine Corps. One, we were just mired in the counterinsurgency fight. And so it really was like the alligator is not close to the boat, it's in the boat. And so if I were to talk to you about, well, what's going to happen, 10 years from now, like, I don't know what's going to happen 10 minutes from now. If you have a counter IED thing, I'm more than happy to. Anyways, and it's not to say that the leadership back then didn't have imagination. They just didn't really have time. These are more pressing matters, unfortunately. And so, it's not to throw shade at where we were at back then, but this idea of futures and to look at things, it was all in the hypothetical, and so I don't have time to talk about the hypothetical. And then here we are, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording, like, all you have to do is turn to any sort of news outlet, and when you start looking at the international conflicts, these things are not hypothetical anymore, and there's so much more down the pipe. And I think what you guys are doing, leaning into narrative, is really key, because obviously it gives the context for leadership, but it also ignites the imagination of the people on the ground as well. And so you have this very interesting synergy where you have leadership saying, all right, tell me more. And then you have the younger kids, the emerging generation saying, I can do a lot.
Now, look, you're saying it better than I ever could here. I mean, I think you're exactly right in that this, competition for attention.
Yeah, there you go.
In the cognitive realm now is so acute, just in our daily lives, let alone it's not much different in professional ones.
Yeah.
And the challenge that leaders have, I think, is both being able to get exposed to novel ideas and technologies, right, in ways that may not fit the orthodoxy, but that's actually often how they enter the real world. The other is the amount of time that any one person has to lift eyes up from the inbox or the to-do list of the day.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary because the tempo of the real world, as you said, it's in the sci-fi realm. The things that we're seeing shift at a fundamental level, and not just American society, but of course, other parts of the world.
It's civilian applications to a lot of it too, right?
And that proliferation of those self-same technologies kind of compounds everything. And so there's almost a moment to sort of pull back and say, the old ways aren't working. What else can we do? And look, I would never say you should use a novel instead of a national security strategy or national defense strategy. Yeah. However, I am saying that like we did for MARSOC, as we've explored in the past, some of their new operational concepts with, open source unclassified fiction, or we just, did for the Army, really taking something quite complex and often less accessible, like doctrine. How can you take doctrine and create a narrative around it so you're both teaching it, but also giving people a chance to understand how it's going to be applied in an operational context? And I think there are some real opportunities there that both afford people a way to access an idea, which is like, incepting something can be one of the most powerful ways you transform an organization, like at the individual level. Also, amidst all this technological transformation, staying centered, just bullseye on the human dimension. And that's true for culture, in an organization. It's also true for understanding an adversary, or of course, any of the myriad other actors who might be in a future conflict and what they might bring to it, right? Both, problems and solutions. And so I think we're in a great moment that's even different than when we first, collaborated back at that Atlantic Council project. The world, so to speak, is kind of catching up with it, and we're really lucky to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I feel that especially through Warfighting Lab and Futures Division, stuff that you guys are working through, useful fiction and stuff, is that this is one of the good stories we have where we're not chasing the 8 ball. Especially the Marine Corps, that just is, it's almost in our blood to be adverse to change. That's why we celebrate our birthday, right? Like, we love what we've done in the past. And I really just truly appreciate how much leadership is kind of leaning into this. And like I said, for once in a long time, we're not playing catch up.
Just to pat myself on the back, but Burn-In, our second book, which is about actually a Marine who's an FBI agent hunting an anti-technology terrorist with a robot partner. And this terrorist is trying to kind of bring down American society because of its reliance on technology. That was added to the Commandant's reading list under innovation, right? So there you have an opportunity for someone who may not have an easy way to access or think through what is a world like in which robotics are every day, a world in which some of the profound forces of AI in the economy and society are really unleashed. Yeah. What is that like? And then I think then you can kind of work back from that world and say, hey, what are the things I like about that world, or what are the things I want to avoid? And I think for me personally, that's often something I really resonate with, is trying to introduce a cautionary aspect into the work we do. Some of it is more about communication. How do we take a concept and share it? But also, having clear eyes about where the gaps might be, and are there ways we can coalesce around, fixing them. I think, technologies like robotics, which we're seeing obviously being used every minute of the day in Ukraine, are helping people understand, at least in the U.S. and within, the allied countries, where warfare is going. Yeah. But there are also, software-driven dimensions to that may make things scale almost logarithmically that I think we're still getting our heads around. And then looking back at ourselves, what does that mean? As a writer, or even as in my old life over a decade ago as a journalist, the question of kind of then what, or what next, is a really, really powerful one. And I think we're in an era where it's really crucial to keep asking that again and again.
Yeah, the how and the why, right? Yeah. Right, not just the what. And I think too, and to use the Ukraine example, and I think when you are diving into the narrative, you're getting that. The whole context. It's not just an information dump, because it would be very easy to go, look at all this technology and look at the drones, which is a very appropriate thing to look at. But you also look at, on the ground, the trenches they built probably are pretty similar to some that were built in World War I. So like you said, there's still a human dimension here. We're not so inundated with technology that the guy building it, sitting in a trench line isn't still important. And what's his story?
Right? I think this notion of history that you mentioned with the Marine Corps, and I'm a civilian, right, an outsider, you have a different relationship to it than I do, but I see that as actually something that can be a strength. And in part because, I love history, and I think there's really, really powerful lessons that can be learned in echoes that you can almost sound for, to figure out where are the continuities. And to your point about trench warfare existing in a 21st century conflict that is being dominated by drones that can basically be hand launched.
Right.
Like that is not something that was on the bingo, cards of
Right.
people maybe even, in 2019 or so, even 2020.
Yeah.
Even on the show floor here, I think there's some really illustrative examples of that. I mean, from where I'm sitting, I can see the Kratos, unmanned aircraft system, which looks like a sci-fi fighter jet. On the other side of the exhibit floor, about an aisle away, is Brunton compasses.
Yeah.
Selling handheld
so
compasses
good,
that you can navigate with, and to me, that's the embodiment of the operating environment that the Marine Corps is facing, that they're still connected with because of that history. Working with MARSOC and obviously the Raider history in World War II, there are echoes, but it's also quite different. And it's been a lot of interesting, fun to see the command kind of how they articulate where the continuities are, but also where we say, hey, this is nothing like the past. Let's innovate, let's adapt, and let's transform.
Yeah. So speaking of modern day Marine, I mean, I get granted this is just day one and we just started the afternoon of it, but what are your thoughts? How have you enjoyed your time so far?
Well, my philosophy in what I'm kind of hunting for is I'm looking at both the biggest things I can find, like that Kratos aircraft, or some of the smallest, right? I'm really interested in miniaturization, and that means also software, to be honest, because things that can scale, I think are going to be really, really influential. Simultaneously, mass still has a quantity. And a value that's really, really crucial to thinking about modern conflict, especially in the distances of the Pacific.
It's more than just cube space, right?
So the other aspect is asymmetry. If you think about the stand-in force concept that the Marine Corps is moving towards, some of the pretty profound changes they're making, programmatically, culturally around shifting from armor and even with aircraft. Where does the lethality show up here? Right, and especially at that hyper-distributed, survivable, long endurance. And I don't mean in the aircraft sense, but in the truly, in the notion that a great power conflict with China, if it becomes kinetic, is, in my view, going to last years. The idea of a short, sharp war, which again we spoke to this thesis of the long war and Ghost Fleet. I think it's really, really crucial to be aware of and to plan accordingly. But that's hard to do. Sir Lawrence Freedman, the British strategist, just recently republished an essay of his that I happened to read on the way down here from Boston about this notion of the long wars and the difficulty in kind of defense planning and prioritizing them. But we have to know that everything from supply chains to industrial production, which are thankfully part of the conversation today in the U.S. We're really looking at what that means. And again, Ukraine has been a leading indicator of some of just the battlefield requirements around munitions. So anybody who's in kind of CD&I at the Marine Corps is wrestling with those same things, thankfully, too now, rather than the position where we might find ourselves had we not had to kind of think and confront this, trying to figure out after the fact. And the speed of modern warfare,
But looking at an expenditure report, like, you use how many javelins? I think, again, I'm so happy that people such as yourself are on the forefront of this, and that it's being sort of brought into the conversation and everything. So thank you so much, August, for spending some time. Hopefully we can get you on and maybe spend a little more time, because I love your perspective on narrative. Clearly, you're one of the experts on it, but to get your thoughts on, to just dive more into your thoughts on what it is about innovation and imagination that are so critical to this future fight. I mean, I hate to go on and on, but I think there's a reason why it was called Force Design 2030 initially, and now it's just Force Design, is because I think leadership is seeing this as a continuum, and we need to be thinking. We need to have that imagination and really try to embrace and cultivate it amongst all up and down the ranks. So,
well, look, it's great to reconnect, and count me in anytime you want to do this again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, take care.
The Marine Corps requires leaders of all ranks to have a deep understanding of war and the employment of force. MCDP 1 reminds Marines that the military profession is a thinking profession. Every Marine is expected to be a student of the art and science of war. It goes on to say that every Marine has an individual responsibility to study the profession of arms, Self-directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. The Marine Corps Association understands the critical importance of ensuring that Marines are as mentally ready for combat as they are physically ready. That is why we offer an entire page dedicated to wargaming on our website. We have recommendations for both tabletop board games as well as computer games. And for Marine Corps Association members, there is a discount code for War Game Design Studios that you can find on the website. War games are a great way to immerse yourself in history and to put yourself in the shoes of the great leaders of history. Go beyond guided instruction and experience the thrill of wargaming. Check us out at mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. That's mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. Take your training to the next level. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.